had to stop the progression of the videos that I'm working on to talk about Morbius. I don't know if I should call you out, bro. You know who you are, but I sincerely apologize because this isn't the 2 videos that I've been teasing. But this video idea has been on my mind since the release of the trailers of Morbius, and I just wanted to get it off my chest. So we all watched Morbius and we thought it was either mediocre or terrible. Now I can't speak for everybody. If you liked it, then good for you. But the majority of audiences, including me, thought it was an awful movie. An awful movie that the people from Sony live action department thought they could sell to us if we saw some Spider-Man references or a lazy form of build-up for the Sinister Six. The movie is out now and almost everybody is either making a meme about it or talking about how good it was.
There's really a lot of themes and subtle vicissitudes with the film that a lot of laymen just might not get on the first watch.
The meme became so insanely popular that Sony thought it would be a good idea to bring it back to the theaters. And well, we all know the results of that one. Even Jared Leto decided to join in on the meme, and we also know the results as well.
And now the meme is dead and the cause of death is posting cringe.
So rather than giving my thoughts on the movie and talking about how bad this Morbius was, I decided to talk about a different Morbius instead. One that was compelling and discuss some of the potential it had or still has if it got its own project. And like I said earlier, this discussion of mine is one that I thought about even before the movie came out. So believe it or not, but Morbius was a character in the 90's Spider-Man series, and he was one of the most compelling characters in the show. Even before he became a vampire or a villain, he still had interesting layers to his character. Now, I'm not going to do a full breakdown of his character or his origin simply because 1, that's not mainly what this video is about, and 2, a cool channel called Panels to Pixels did an excellent job dissecting it better than I could. So if you guys want to check out the video, the link will be on the screen. The only few things that I personally would say is that Morbius wouldn't be as compelling as he is today if it wasn't for the reinvention that John Semper Jr. gave him. Thanks to the effort of what this man did to Morbius, we've had some compelling and tragic stories based on the character. The best ones to flesh out this impact has been the 90's animated series, the Spider-Man comics, and the Morbius standalone comics, where they were able to tell stories of just how tragic and broken his character really is. And personally, I can strongly make an argument that a spin-off series on Morbius after the 90's Spider-Man show would have worked. Now, like I said, I'm not going to break down his origin in the series, but in order to strongly make a solid argument, I have to talk about a few important layers of the character and the other closest characters that were revolving around him in the show. So basically, when most people talk about Morbius from the 90's series, they usually don't talk about his character, his motivations, and his relationships. They instead choose to remember him as the vampire who drank plasma through his hands. And while it is a little funny, it's also disappointing that not many people saw the work that was done to his character. To give a basic description of the character, Morbius is a vampire that will never be free of the curse that he placed on himself no matter how hard he tries. In fact, the more effort he puts to change himself, the worse and worse it gets. Some of you guys might see this and think that he's bland, or maybe Blade has a similar and better concept, but if you ask me, I'll have to disagree with you. Sure, Blade and Morbius have some similarities. They are both half humans and half vampires, and thanks to the movies and comics, Blade now has a much bigger reputation over Morbius. But what makes Morbius more special to me is that he gave himself the curse and burden of immortality. While Blade had no choice in the matter because he was still a baby, Morbius on the other hand, with a sense of desperation of trying to save his people and his country, accidentally did it to himself. And ever since, he's been trying to free himself of the vampire curse, only for it to keep getting worse and worse every time he tries. And the worst part of it is that he knows that he will eventually give in to the monstrous creature that he created for himself. Seeing this type of concept for the first time as a kid in a Spider-Man show really blew me away. And here's a fun fact about me. After watching the episodes that had to do with Morbius and the characters surrounding him, it got me very interested into checking out other vampire shows, books, and movies. And going back and rewatching the show many times now, I can see how the vampire books, more specifically Anne Rice vampire books, influenced the decision of the character of Morbius.
Now I want the whole story. Why was that refugee from an Anne Rice novel looking for you?
I understood that reference.
And it's not just Morbius, it influenced those that were heavily tied to his character as well. The relationship he had with Blade and Black Cat most especially. And thanks to how they molded the stories around these three characters, they ended up giving us a really nice setup for his own show. Basically, the setup for the spin-off is that Blade's mom is alive and she is a full-blown vampire that wants the world to be at her feet. So this makes Blade, Morbius and Black Cat go after her. Blade is conflicted on what he should do because it's his mother. Morbius is the only one that can easily find her because he is a full-blown living vampire. And apart from being Morbius' girlfriend, Felicia serves as a middle ground to both of them. I don't know if I'm the only one who's seeing this potential, but this is a very solid setup to a standalone show. With this type of setup, Blade, Morbius and Felicia can go on a supernatural adventure encountering most of Blade's rogues gallery like Legion of the Unliving, Draconis, Lilith and Deacon Frost, just to name a few. And when they finally get to Blade's mom, we can have another setup that she was turned and was working for Dracula from the very start. Dracula ends up being the main and biggest villain that our main heroes have to stop. And all through their adventures, we could have them visit and encounter other heroic characters of Marvel's underworld as well. Maybe in 1 or 2 episodes of the series, we actually see a team up with other heroes like Jacob Russoff, Ghost Rider, and even other members of the Midnight Suns to stop a crossover threat. Maybe a villain the Midnight Suns were tackling at the time, and the main heroes had a crossover to help them. This setup that I'm explaining right now isn't something that I'm just simply making up when it comes to the main characters. In season 5 episode 10 of the 90's series, we can see all 3 of them working together to try and catch Blade's mom before Black Cat was taken away to help out Spider-Man and the other heroes. So I personally would like to think that if they made a show like this, some of the ideas that I mentioned earlier might have been expanded upon. Now I know that from all that I've said here, it sounds like Blade is the main character of the show. And yes, he is. He is the one with more comics and more villains. He is the one that can easily bring in some fresh characters and fresh concepts to the show. And hell, this entire setup of the show is only possible because of Blade. But while Blade is the main character and his stories are the biggest inspirations for the show, Morbius to me, if done well like it was done in the 90's series, will end up being the most compelling one. Because while Blade for the most part has control over his vampire side, Morbius keeps on struggling with his. Morbius won't be as strong as other vampires, and that's simply because he cares for all humans. He feels guilty when he feeds on human blood, so to him, he'll much rather go hungry or prefer to settle for animal blood. And despite the bargain and peace that he's made with himself, he's still slowly losing himself to his darkest side. So what I'm trying to say is that Morbius fears that he will still end up as a monster, and him and Black Cat knows this. They know the tragic end to their relationship. Not just Morbius' inevitable fate as a monster, but the acknowledgement that she will eventually die and Morbius will keep going on because of his immortality. And to me, this would be very interesting to see if this series actually ends up happening. Speaking of Black Cat, Felicia will have a huge role to play in this show as well. Aside from being the love interest and soulmate to Morbius, Felicia would be the one out of the 3 with a clear human mind, and she will help serve as a moral compass to both Morbius and Blade, since they are the ones most especially dealing with their demons and inner struggles. Felicia is there to constantly remind them of their humanity, to remind them that they are needed to fight the good fight, that despite how tragic they are and how they think they know their story will end, they still shouldn't give up on themselves and they should hope for a brighter future. Felicia in the series wouldn't just be a sexy figure or a love interest. She will instead end up being the anchor of all 3 of them, because she can somewhat relate to what both of them are going through. She relates with Blade for the parental struggles and issues that he has with his mother, just like she did with her father. And not only is she a high school friend to Morbius, but she understands a little bit of what it feels like to live between 2 worlds. And as the series goes on, we see just how all 3 of them keep supporting each other. These are just some of the few ideas that I think the show could have had if it got a green light. And some of the few extra more that we can have is Terry Lee's return for a few episodes for emotional connect for Blade, as she was the love interest for him in the Spider-Man series. We can also have Blade and Morbius have a few squabbles and battles with each other, thanks to how similar and different they are, and then later on settle their conflicts with one another. And all the things that I'm just talking about, that I've just mentioned, are just the character aspect. there is still so much more that could have been done if this show had gotten a green light. The supernatural and underworld concepts of the Marvel Universe could have been brought to its full glory. One of the episodes that I would love to see is an episode based on the future, where Felicia died of old age and Blade was killed during battle. So the only one who is still alive because of his immortality is Morbius, and we see just how he is coping in the supernatural future without his friends around anymore. In fact, no hero is alive at this point. It's just Morbius, and it's simply because of the tragic cause of immortality. Think of how cool this type of concept will look on the screen. Now, I can't state for a fact that John Semper Jr. and his team actually thought about this concept, but from the way the characters acted, the pacing of the story, the build-up of the relationships, the teasing of the Marvel's underworld, and the way it was set up, I personally would like to believe that John Semper Jr. might have at least thought about this idea, but at the time it just couldn't be brought up because of how violent and mature the concept looked. An animated show like this wouldn't have been possible in the 90s, especially when it was a spin-off series from a generally well-known kids show. However, if the show was to be brought up now, to be given a green light today, in a time of R-rated Marvel shows like Hitmonkey and a similar concept like Netflix Castlevania, then this can be a possibility. Marvel just recently gave a green light to the continuation of the 90s X-Men series, so who knows what else from the 90s universe could get a continuation or a spin-off show altogether. And yes, I know that I might be stretching too far and hoping for something that probably only me is thinking about. I know that even if he's giving that green light, it might not be as good as I'm hoping it out to be, because it will probably be in the hands of Disney instead of Hulu or Netflix. And even if it does end up being good, no one might actually watch the show because of the negative effect of the Morbius movie. Hell, even if it does get a green light, who's to say the voice talents and even John Semper Jr. could come back for the project? However, despite being aware of all this, I still want a project like this to take form because of the potential it has, and I hope that someday it actually does. Get a creative team that knows how to mix up Morbius, Blade, and Black Cat definitive stories to give this to us. Let's take Morbius and make him memorable for the right reasons, not because of the memes. Let's take this character and make him compelling on the screen again. Let's see how tragic and relatable his life and story as a vampire can get. If this show never ends up happening, then it's probably for the best, simply because I personally like the ending that they had in the 90s Spider-Man series. Despite how open-ended their characters felt, I was personally satisfied with their conclusion. But if it actually does, and it ends up being a really good show, well, you guys will know where you heard it from first. But this is just my thinking. I would love to know what some of you guys' thoughts are on the subject. Did you think of the spin-off series like I did as a kid? Or did you think of something entirely different? And now that I've shed some light on it, what do you think of this concept? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.